Beijing calls this Hong Kong's worst crisis in the more than 2 decades since the 1997 handover.
香港激进示威者
Hong Kong's protesters have repeatedly used dangerous tools to attack police. These actions constitute seriously violent crimes and are starting to show signs of terrorism.
The protesters would probably agree the city's in crisis, but for very different reasons.
Sending troops or using emergency ordinance is not the way out. We will continue our fight no matter how they arrest and prosecute us.
Such extensive disruptions are pushing our city, the city we all love, and many of us helped to build, to the verge of a very dangerous situation.
Demonstrations that started as opposition to Carrie Lam's proposed extradition bill quickly morphed into broader resistance to the Hong Kong government and, in particular, the police, as well as what activists believe is political interference from Beijing and an erosion of their rights. Violence escalated as Lam for months refused to meet the demonstrators' demands. Police retaliated against hurled firebombs and bricks with tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and batons. Running battles, vandalism, and civil disobedience continued even after Lam acquiesced and officially withdrew the bill.
It's seriously too little too late.
Nerves are frayed, positions entrenched. Hong Kong is a city on edge. I'm Stephen Engel. Welcome to this Bloomberg special, Hong Kong on Edge. Hong Kong calls itself Asia's world city, a semi-autonomous global gateway to mainland China. But it's also, of course, a key international finance and commercial hub. But that status is coming under increasing threat from multiple fronts. You have the political turmoil and unrest, you have the US-China trade war, and a widening wealth gap. Hong Kong is the world's most expensive city with the least affordable housing market. Many young protesters feel left behind financially and betrayed politically. And that socioeconomic frustration seen on the streets is wreaking havoc on the economy. Fitch has cut Hong Kong's credit rating, visitor arrivals and retail sales are tanking, small business confidence is at a record low, and Hong Kong's GDP is heading for a possible recession.
I firmly believe that for a lot of these young people, livelihood, economics, housing is important, but that's not the primary drive. The primary drive is that they long for a more balanced one country, two system.
We'll try to answer what went wrong and whether there is a clear path forward under one country, two systems. To do that, we've assembled some of the more pivotal figures in Hong Kong's journey from British colony to Chinese special administrative region. The Iron Lady, Anson Chan, a nickname she earned as the last Chief Secretary of Hong Kong under the British and the first one under Chinese rule. Chan was the second most powerful leader in Hong Kong.
The government should pause to ask itself what has led to the escalating violence, both on the part of the police and on the part of the protesters.
The disciplinarian, Regina Ip. She was Hong Kong's first female Secretary of Security. She spearheaded a failed attempt to pass controversial Beijing-backed national security legislation.
A lot of damage has been done. A lot of, not only the damage to the economy, but also reputational damage.
The Democrat, Martin Lee. He helped draft Hong Kong's post-handover mini-constitution, the Basic Law, that still governs Hong Kong today. A sharp critic of Beijing, Lee is known in Hong Kong as the father of democracy.
I have been fighting for democracy and to preserve the rule of law for 35 years now, always by using peaceful means. What has Beijing done? Ignored us completely.
The career lawmaker, Rita Fan. She served not only in the British colonial legislature, She also was the first president of the Post-Handover Legislative Council. Fan served for years on the Standing Committee of China's parliament, the National People's Congress.
Do not allow our opposition to take us down into the dirty river and drown us.
The businessman, Michael Tin. He founded the clothing chains U2 and G2000 before becoming a Hong Kong lawmaker and currently serves as Hong Kong's deputy to China's National People's Congress.
I run a retail business. I don't think I can hang on for another 6 months. This thing has got to stop.
And the media tycoon, billionaire Jimmy Lai. After founding the clothing retailer Giordano, Lai went into publishing. His Next Digital produces the provocative Apple Daily newspaper. Staunchly pro-democracy, Lai is often a target of Beijing's wrath.
What we are fighting for is the first battle of the new Cold War.
So how did the situation get so dire? And what are the protesters' demands? Much of the turmoil can be tied to Chief Executive Carrie Lam's refusal to officially withdraw the extradition bill she tried to push through the legislature, even as an estimated 1 million people and then later 2 million people marched peacefully through Hong Kong in opposition to the bill. Lawmakers, too, were divided over attempts to change the city's extradition laws. Hong Kong currently has 20 extradition treaties around the world. The amendments would have allowed extraditions to any jurisdiction on a case-by-case basis, including to mainland China, Macau, and Taiwan, neighboring territories that don't have such agreements with Hong Kong. To fast-track the bill, the government pointed to the case of a Hong Kong man wanted in Taiwan for allegedly murdering his girlfriend, but there was no formal avenue to return him to Taiwan to face trial.
No country, no territory wants to become a haven for offenders, especially offenders in serious crimes.
Critics say the new measure would have subjected people here and those passing through Hong Kong to possible arbitrary detention or unfair trials in China, in courts controlled by the Communist Party. Hong Kong's judicial system is based on British common law.
What is at issue here is the total lack of trust in the legal and criminal system in the mainland.
It is totally untrue that large numbers of Hong Kong people will be handcuffed or sent to mainland China. That's part of the fear and smear campaign mounted by the opposition.
Lam, in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg Television in March, defended the bill.
There are important procedural safeguards in place before a request will be entertained and a fugitive offender will be returned to that requesting jurisdiction.
But there is still that perception out there, it might be wrong, that Hong Kong's autonomy is being compromised here.
No, certainly
China.
not. This is a
but
piece
is the government
of
doing enough to change those perceptions? And how do you start to do
we are trying to address those concerns, but it would be wrong to associate this with the high degree of autonomy.
Lam has since declined further interview requests. As the debate devolved into violence on the streets and even into the legislative chamber itself, Carrie Lam realized she was perhaps fighting a losing battle. She suspended the bill, but there was an important caveat. She didn't officially withdraw it.
There are still lingering doubts about the government's sincerity, or worries whether the government will restart the process in the Legislative Council. So I reiterate here, there is no such plan. The bill is dead.
But it wouldn't be for another 2.5 tumultuous months until Lam would finally give in to the protesters' demand number one.
The government will formally withdraw the bill in order to fully allay public concerns.
It's very unfortunate. It was not handled properly. She apologized for that. So I think it's time for us to move on. But moving on doesn't mean that we don't deal with the problem.
The next three demands are all tied to the summer clashes with police. Demonstrators want an independent inquiry into alleged police brutality. But Carrie Lam has rejected that, saying the police already have a complaints council. Protesters question if it can be impartial. And police themselves may fear they could be punished for carrying out orders stemming from a political impasse. Protesters also want an amnesty for those arrested so far on charges ranging from illegal assembly to assaulting police officers and rioting. And they also want certain clashes not to be classified as riots, which would carry more severe jail sentences for those convicted. Lam won't give in, insisting Hong Kong must uphold the rule of law. But it's the fifth demand, universal suffrage, that's perhaps the most problematic. Protesters want to be able to directly choose their chief executive and lawmakers without interference from Beijing. But even those who support the protest movement may question whether it's realistic to think Beijing would allow anyone to be the city's leader. Currently, only half of Hong Kong's legislative seats are directly elected, and the chief executive is chosen by a 1,200-member committee largely handpicked by Beijing. Protesters say the local government's intransigence towards their demands is why universal suffrage is now their ultimate goal. Could we have avoided all this mayhem over the last 2 to 3 months if Carrie Lam had simply withdrawn the bill back in June?
Definitely. You know, when the first million people went out, if she withdrew it, nothing would have happened in the last 3 months. And I think the whole thing will be calmed down. But in this 3 months, we realize that unless we have assurance of universal suffrage, we will always have constant encroachment on our freedom.
This is essentially an illegal demonstration as protesters are defying the police ban and have taken over the central part of Hong Kong. And we've just been alerted that police have fired tear gas in the next door neighborhood, and they're asking people to get out of here. Now, protesters have adopted a slogan, revolution of our times, but it isn't a call for independence from China, which of course to Beijing is a red line, but all of it is keeping Hong Kong on edge.
There is no challenge to sovereignty and no challenge to one country, two systems. On the contrary, it is precisely because everybody wants to see two systems remaining intact.
Since the handover, we saw our autonomy slowly eroded. Disqualification of 6 lawmakers, kidnappings of booksellers and activists jailed are proof of China's tightening grip.
An alarming rate of young children are running away from home to become frontline riot fighters, radicalized to perpetrate criminal acts.
Welcome back to Hong Kong on Edge. To better understand how the House Hong Kong got so divided, we need to take a look back at the most recent history, at the end of one colonial lease and the introduction of a new landlord from the north. Hong Kong's return to China was enshrined in 1984 with the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the formation of an unprecedented one country, two systems framework to be governed under the Basic Law. Hong Kong essentially would serve as a firewall between the vastly different political, legal, and economic systems of China and the West. That is, for at least 50 years post-handover. Protesters feel China, by backing measures that are seen as limiting civil liberties and democracy, is violating its promises to Hong Kong for a high level of autonomy until 2047. Michael Tin wears many hats: businessman, lawmaker, and Hong Kong's deputy to China's legislature.
I'm a very unique animal.
A lot of the debate now is coming down to this book, The Basic Law, which is the mini constitution for Hong Kong. And demand number 5 has kind of morphed from Carrie Lam, you must resign, to we want universal suffrage. Now, universal suffrage is sort of guaranteed in here for the chief executive and also the legislative council, but there's interpretations of that. From your perspective, is China reneging on the pledges made in this book?
Let me hold this. Everything written in this book does not involve a clear-cut yes or no. It's a matter of degree.
Universal suffrage is laid down in the Basic Law as the ultimate aim, in accordance with 2 important principles: orderly and gradual process, and in accordance with the actual situation of the day. If the violence continues, the unrest and violence continue, I'm sure you agree, no government can hold this sort of elections.
It really hurts me that a Hong Konger like Regina Ip should come up with this excuse.
Ultimate aim, that's ultimately is a long timeline. I mean, was it written purposely vague?
The Basic Law says during the first 10 years, we will be developing towards universal suffrage. And they promised us that by the end of the 10th year, we could have it. But now we don't even have a date in sight. So they are in breach of the promise. And I want to hold them to it.
Now, in 2014 and 2015, the Pan-Democrats rejected Beijing's proposal for electoral reform, which would have given basically permanent residents a right to vote, but for a very small, pre-screened, vetted by Beijing pool of candidates for chief executives. The Pan-Democrats rejected that.
Sure.
And at the time, 5 years ago, it was seen that was going to be the best offer on the table.
What's the difference between a rotten apple, a rotten banana, and a rotten orange? Of course you reject it. The issue is very simple. Do you trust the people and give them the vote? Or do you want to control the result of those elections? It was put beautifully at the time by a British civil servant, which is Beijing doesn't mind elections so long as they know the result before the first vote is cast.
It's a pity that my Pan-Dem colleagues vetoed the package approved by Beijing in June 2015.
Was that the best offer Beijing was probably going to give?
Yes, it's still on the table.
Forget about whether I'm an NPC deputy. This is sheer common sense. We are not becoming independent. We are still part of China, okay? And a lot of people forgot that China today is still a communist regime, highly authoritarian, all right? Let's all remember that and face that. Those who cannot accept this, they really have to think about whether they want to live in Hong Kong. The question is, how do we maintain a reasonable balance of two systems within this overall structure? So what they are offering, China is offering, which I totally support, is they control the nomination and we choose between two candidates.
People have realized that China is not going to give us freedom if they have a choice, unless we have the assurance of universal suffrage. This is very clear. After millions of people went out to demonstrate what we got, nothing but a realization that the fight has to go on.
You didn't have democracy under the Brits.
We have the institution which are the result of the democracy of the British democracy. We have the rule of law, we have the free market, we have the private property right, we have an open society, we have free press. All these free institutions is what democracy is guaranteeing.
If the violence continues, frankly, if there are more and more people waving the American flag, what would the Beijing leaders think? They'd be worried. What if universal suffrage elections return someone hostile to Beijing? I think these are legitimate worries.
If one country, two systems failed, who will benefit? Certainly not Hong Kong, certainly not China, but it will certainly benefit the party, I should say, in Taiwan, who's looking for Taiwan independence. So I would not be surprised if someone gave me evidence that that party is involved in instigating all these riots.
Beijing has accused foreign forces and Taiwan of stirring up the unrest in Hong Kong. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council has rejected such claims as talking nonsense.
I do not think that the community of Hong Kong could have trained them or educated them to such an extent. Just look at the way they are so well organized. So they must have been trained.
I have no evidence myself, but certainly the rhetoric and the tactics used by a lot of the ringleaders smack of pro-independence.
While the protesters utilize social media to mobilize, the movement is widely seen as ringleader-less. With no figureheads to target, mainland state media has singled out the Hong Kong pro-democracy advocates Martin Lee, Anson Chan, Albert Ho, and Jimmy Lai as Hong Kong's new Gang of Four, Communist Party lexicon for enemies of the state. Hu Shijin is the editor-in-chief of the Chinese state-run newspaper, The Global Times.
那在我们的眼里，他们就是在祸害香港，所以呢，大家。
In our eyes, they are ruining Hong Kong, so people call them the Gang of Four. It's a vivid metaphor, which I think is quite appropriate.
There's not a shred of evidence that the foreign country is mobilizing this demonstration or resistance. All lies.
You've been called a U.S. stooge as well, a traitor to the Chinese nation. Are you a traitor?
Well, I consider all these names a badge of honor.
I have been always honest and sincere about the promises that were given to us, and I want to hold them to it. I said, look, you promised us democracy. It's written in the Basic Law, and they call me a traitor. Now, it's their fault, not my fault.
The mudslinging from all sides is making matters worse, given there's no solution to the mayhem on the table, if there's even a table.
Every day I receive film clips from this side and that side, only shooting footage of what they want to show.
It's polarized.
It's absolutely polarized.
I think successive leaders, allow me to say so, fail to articulate an appealing vision of our future under one country, two systems. Does it mean Hong Kong being engulfed by the ever stronger mainland China? The young people, a lot of them, only see the downside of integration, but not the upside.
Back in 2003, you were the face of the amendments proposed for Article 23, the national security, the anti-subversion laws that sparked, what, 500,000 people coming out on the streets. It ended up with the downfall of Tung Chee-hwa. If I may be frank,
my resignation preceding that.
You know what it's like to be vilified in this town. You were vilified. How, back then and now, does the Hong Kong government keep on underestimating or misreading the public discontent?
I think Mrs. Lam admitted to that formally, that the legislative effort this time complete failure, that she failed to keep the pulse of the people, and she misread the situation.
If it had not been for the people marching on the streets, then together the executive and the legislature, which is now basically a rubber stamp, would have passed that legislation. And that points to the bigger issue, which is that all of the policies made by the government come from an unelected government, and the people are wising up to that now. The extradition bill helped them to focus on that point. That's why they're still coming out and protesting.
I think that was just the last straw that broke the camel's back. Before that, we've had a whole series of action on the part of the SAR government, which eroded Hong Kong's rights and freedoms, took away our civil liberties, and narrowed the space for political discourse.
I believe we have a high level of autonomy as prescribed in the Basic Law. Because if we don't have that, we will not be handling our present situation in such a way. Up next, the standoff enters a critical phase as businesses here in Hong Kong are forced to toe the China line.
All my colleagues are all terrified because of this white terror.
Protests in Hong Kong are having direct and indirect effects on demand in a number of our businesses.
We are the people of Hong Kong. If this government don't treasure the people like us, the next generations, the economy will not grow again. We are the capital of the economy.
Welcome back to Hong Kong on Edge. Now, Hong Kong is a city where making money, not trouble, is the lifeblood. But it's clear to everyone the economy is suffering. Businesses, big and small, are struggling to stay afloat.
I think short term for Hong Kong is going to be painful because obviously we have the trade war, China trade war with the U.S. Hong Kong obviously will be a collateral damage to that. And of course, then we also have our own social unrest in Hong Kong that we still need to deal with.
And that is a big deal to the global ratings agencies. Citing the uncertainty surrounding the unrest, Fitch downgraded Hong Kong's debt rating and Moody's lowered its outlook for the city.
To change the outlook of Hong Kong's rating from stable to negative, of course, is something that we find disappointing, and we do not concur.
There's a reputational risk going on right now. I don't particularly agree that it impacts its credit fundamentals. I mean, from a pure credit perspective, Hong Kong is bulletproof.
Fitch has downgraded us, and I don't blame them. If you have ongoing unrest, people start to worry about safety.
Now, we're not saying that we think that the one country, two systems framework is in jeopardy. We're not saying that the basic law is in jeopardy, but this is a huge test.
Many argue Hong Kong's economy may have been due an overhaul anyway, regardless of the unrest.
In a nutshell, it's because we are declining in competitiveness. Used to monopolize all the intermediary functions for China. It's no longer the case. You know, our economic structure is narrowing. And in my time, people of my generation, baby boomers, we get accelerated quickly. But it's not the same for the young people. So I have a lot of sympathy for them.
Many Chinese students come to Hong Kong to attend university. Those are the creme de la creme of China. And our students are simply not as industrious and intelligent as they are.
It's a harsh assessment given the fact so much of Hong Kong's upward mobility, or lack thereof, is tied to the sky-high price of property. There's an extreme shortage of land here, especially parcels set aside for low-income housing. Property tycoons who control much of the wealth and, of course, much of the land here in Hong Kong have been relatively quiet throughout this summer of discontent. Some, like the man that Hong Kong citizens affectionately call Superman, Li Ka-shing, have put out full-page ads like this one that essentially say no to violence. Now, they're not taking sides, but they're also not offering any solutions either. You see, the property tycoons have enjoyed an unfettered monopoly for decades, holding on to scarce land to drive up prices. Home prices in what is the world's least affordable housing market have risen 48% in the last 5 years.
On land supply, I think Mrs. Lam took too long pussyfooting around the problem. You know, she set up a land supply task force, and we are not wiser at the end of a consultation. We all know what the options are. She should have moved in, you know, more swiftly and put forward more radical solutions.
Even mainland media has criticized Hong Kong's property tycoons for adding to the angst in society, so it's little surprise that Hong Kong's real power brokers are keeping their collective heads low.
Behind the scene, they will say, you know, they're worried. They can see the implications of what's happening. To some extent, some of them even understand where the protesters are coming from. But publicly, particularly those who have business interests that can be affected by Beijing, either here or in mainland China itself, then of course they have to be seen to be towing the line.
They also don't want the extradition bill.
No. In fact, I think they should be thanking the protesters for stopping the extradition bill dead in its track.
Perhaps no developer has suffered more tangible damage from the protests than the city's subway operator, MTR Corp, whose stations have turned into battlefields.
I never knew or expect that MTR become a target. All we have to do is put our head down and ride through it. It's like going through a turbulence. I just hope that the turbulence is not going to be too long.
MTR has taken heat from all sides of the conflict. It not only has to worry about orchestrated disruptions of service, but also the trashing of its stations. Police even fired tear gas at protesters and hosed them down with pepper spray inside. On top of that, Chinese state media is attacking the company for running additional trains, as protesters have used the subway system to take part in demonstrations.
No matter how much I disagree with someone, I don't think I have the right to hurt or to damage the normal daily life of other people. I think they just wanted Hong Kong to go down the drain.
Well, their slogan has been, if we burn, you burn with us.
Yes, they want everybody to burn with them. But why?
There's another icon of Hong Kong business with perhaps an even worse PR nightmare than MTR, Cathay Pacific Airways. Not only has passenger traffic fallen by the most in a decade, the airline also is facing heavy backlash from China for employees taking part in or supporting the protests. Cathay says it will comply with all of the demands of China's aviation regulator, which threatened to block it from Chinese airspace. Cathay has ordered staff not to take part in illegal protests. Its chairman, John Slozar, and CEO Rupert Hogg have both resigned, and other employees have been suspended or fired.
It's not fair if you can't even explain to me what are the reasons I've been terminated. I've done nothing wrong.
Cathay Pacific confirmed Xi was no longer an employee, stating her departure had nothing to do with her union role.
Management of Cathay Pacific staff is a matter for them, their top management. But I've talked to some of their senior executives, and they said that they think the China's National Aviation Authority has a legitimate point in pointing out that if you have a rogue pilot, who might, drive the aircraft into the Forbidden City, then they could have legitimate concerns.
But come on, that wouldn't be the...
Well, that has happened. MH370, and also a German pilot had psychiatric problems, drove the plane, crashed the plane across against a mountain, and all passengers killed. They explained to me the safety worries.
Is it a threat for other companies that they have to perhaps police what people are posting on the internet?
Well, I've been told, American companies do the same. Don't they do the same? Facebook has shut down some of our accounts, which seem too hostile, too biased, too extremist. Don't all governments set out some rules?
Those who are happy to do business inside mainland China will certainly continue to do business in Hong Kong. All right? But if you treat Hong Kong differently, because Hong Kong is an international financial center, that's why we're here, then those people must be having second thoughts now. And this is such an awful example for the international community.
I think that's a serious threat. Once Beijing or the SAA government is seen to be introducing political considerations into what should be purely commercial activities and decisions, and furthermore affecting the behavior of their staff even during their spare time, then confidence in Hong Kong will definitely be seriously undermined, and you can forget about Hong Kong's status as an international city.
Every Hong Kong company, if working in Hong Kong, you should try to ensure that by and large, your people doesn't get too involved in this. In every company in Hong Kong, we have people who are what we call yellow ribbon. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you perform your work and you do not promulgate independence of Hong Kong.
No corporate, no Western corporate can control their staff's mind, their action, what they say, what they do in their private time and space.
But they can control it by firing, and that's what we've seen with some companies.
Corporates don't have the right to do this. They cannot operate with this kind of ethic from China. They cannot do that.
Is it illegal for companies to do that? Because
it's illegal.
In Hong Kong, you have a right to peacefully demonstrate, and you have a right to freedom of speech.
Definitely, it's illegal. It's illegal. It's against the human right. And nobody will work for a company like this. You just can't find people to work for you. So might as well you have to move out.
If we were to think about all the problems in Hong Kong facing today, right? Shortage of land, housing, whatever you want to call it, okay? This anti-China sentiment, all it really boils down to is a lot of people in Hong Kong don't feel they are a stakeholder. Carrie Lam, of all the misstatements that she had made in the past, which I thought something that really kind of disturbed me. She said a lot of the young people today are not the stakeholders.
Our young people particularly those who are protesting. They always think everybody is wrong except themselves. The government is wrong, the elderly people are wrong, the pro-establishment people are wrong. Not they are all right.
Doesn't help though when the chief executive calls them spoiled children, says they do not have stakes in society.
Well, many of them have never done anything for this society. They have not yet contributed. They are still studying, still using the taxpayers' money.
That is sending a very uncompromising signal to the future middle class of Hong Kong. To me, everyone is a stakeholder, whether or not you pay taxes. You have to listen to everyone.
Coming up, Beijing sends Hong Kong a not-so-subtle warning as PLA soldiers amass at the border.
The PLA is a strong force that defends every inch of its sacred territory.
If you want your home to improve, you do not destroy your home.
I think this is the last battle for us to fight for our future, because if we lose this time, there may be more people got arrested, got prosecuted, and or maybe something worse is going to happen to us.
I think they have been spoiled. They don't understand history.
Welcome back to Hong Kong on Edge. Now, large weekend marches like this one on Hong Kong Island have for the most part been relatively peaceful. There is, though, a smaller, more radical element to the protest movement who have taken to violence, antagonizing police with guerrilla-like tactics. And that is one reason why police actually banned this rally. But as you can see, thousands showed up anyway, angered at the arrest of some of their leaders the day before. There is perhaps an even greater force than politics further polarizing the people of Hong Kong, and that's the situation devolving into violence. Against the police, by the police, against the public, and public property, and whatever and whomever are caught in between. Loyalties are being questioned as rumors swirl of paid vigilantes among rival factions. Citizens are turning on themselves. Give a wrong look, wear the wrong color, speak the wrong dialect, invites trouble. Pent-up rage has been hard to contain. The police force is being stretched to the extremes.
If the people lose respect for the police and they teach their kids that all police are bad people, boy, I don't know how Hong Kong can continue.
I have a great deal of compassion for the police. The police ought not to be put in this invidious position of standing between a very intransigent government and the population at large.
There is the other side. The police use excessive force in carrying out their duties. You see that on the television screen. When somebody's already succumbed by 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes, policemen, and arms were already put at the back, they already tied him up. And you still see people hitting him, right? With a truncheon. That is assault.
Every day that goes by, there's confrontation between the police and the radicals, okay? And there will be footage shown on social media. It will increase the hatred towards the other side. Every day it's building up. Every time there's a confrontation, okay? The police are not saints. The police is not one person. It's a bunch of people. It's so easy for one policeman to be caught on camera hitting someone, maybe for seemingly no reason, and that will be blown up.
As protesters' anger broadened from frustration with local officials and police to attacks on China itself, such as defacing the Chinese national emblem at the Mainland Liaison Office, Beijing increased its threats, with talk of red lines being crossed.
I want to warn all criminal elements, don't misjudge the situation or take restraint as a sign of weakness.
The young people now come up now, they want democracy. They want to keep Hong Kong as it is.
But at what cost, Martin? They're fighting for democracy in the name of democracy, but using violence. Can you condone certain levels of resistance?
I still want to use peaceful means. But how can you blame these young people? And they are prepared to die for it, to keep the city as it is.
There are only two ways to get the violence down swiftly. Number one, you use excessive force, or you use, as the British did in the 1960s, joint police military operations. Now we have no military. The police are all we have. The other way is to use lethal force, and they have not been doing that. So far, touch wood, no fatalities. We want to keep it that way.
Can the police adequately control this, though? They've been viciously vilified.
Yes, I'm glad you said so. They're working very hard. I think they are on a learning curve. They are getting smarter every day. We don't want to involve the PLA or mainland security forces whatsoever, because we understand the overseas perceptions, the sensitivity about one country, two systems.
This is the sword of Damocles hanging over Hong Kong, Chinese military intervention. An estimated 6,000 soldiers of the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, are stationed in Hong Kong at any given time, with thousands more located across the border in Shenzhen, where China held recent exercises and even produced a fairly threatening video on containing civil unrest. To be fair, PLA soldiers are rarely seen in Hong Kong and have played a minimal role since the '97 handover. Should that change and China sends in more troops and tanks to quell unrest, the ramifications for both Hong Kong and China would be enormous.
I think if that happens, and God forbid, it will be the end of one country, two systems. I think it will also put at very serious risk Hong Kong's reputation as a premier financial services center.
Rather than ask, will the PLA intervene, we should perhaps first ask, can it, under the Basic Law? The Basic Law states the PLA, quote, shall not interfere in the local affairs of Hong Kong. However, the local government may, when necessary, ask China for assistance from the garrison in the maintenance of public order and in disaster relief. It's not that black and white, though. Read on, and Article 18 clarifies that a state of emergency can be declared in Hong Kong if turmoil, quote, endangers national unity or security and is beyond the control of the government of Hong Kong. Then Beijing may, quote, issue an order applying the relevant national laws in Hong Kong. In other words, China can send in additional non-garrison troops without Hong Kong's request.
That will be a repeat of Tiananmen Square massacre. And that will bring in the whole world against China.
And what would happen to Hong Kong given that scenario, as well as if the U.S., as they've threatened, at least the Congress has threatened, a withdrawal of the special trading status that the United States gives to Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong will be done. And I think China will be done too.
So it's within the law. It does not mean that PLA coming out from their camp means that that's the end of one country, two systems. That's how other people would like us to think about it.
Will cooler heads prevail then with soldiers across the border and the threat that that poses to Hong Kong?
I don't think that the PLA will do that, because that will give an excuse. Now, mind you, I'm talking about excuse, not the fact. Excuse for a Western country who doesn't want to see China prosper, will use that as an excuse to kill the one country, two systems.
If China were to send its military to Hong Kong, that would mean the situation down there was totally paralyzed. The city, as a financial hub, must already be unable to function. We'd see foreign capital ready to flee. The military's presence would be to restore order there, in order to help rebuild international confidence.
My personal opinion that is the footage we saw, PLA military police getting ready. My humble opinion is saber rattling, just a shot across the bow to warn us that they are there, they're ready.
I hope that the pragmatic solution is that Beijing will listen and try and feel the pulse of the community here, particularly understand where this generation of young Hong Kong people are coming from. They are not against China, they're not against China's sovereignty. What they are against is to see the steady erosion of one country, two systems.
One country, two systems it's not just good for Hong Kong, it is good for the whole of China. And anyone who have any sense and who want Hong Kong to prosper, not only survive but prosper, we must keep one country, two systems.
Do you think the leaders in Beijing, like Xi Jinping, believe that one country, two systems is a workable model until 2047 and beyond?
I think they all believe in this. Only with Hong Kong being different can Hong Kong contribute to the development of China until 2047. And after that, we then look at the system and say, do we still want to keep it? Now, my idea is yes.
You're taking a look at a rising China, a China that nobody can afford to ignore. And you have to ask yourself, since you have to engage with China, on what terms would we like this engagement to take place?
That's why some lawmakers, including the pro-Beijing Michael Tin, have urged Carrie Lam to make one more concession to the protesters to heal society, and that is to form an independent and impartial committee of inquiry.
The protesters today, when they become parents 10 years later, what will they teach their children? So there will be an increasing divide between Hong Kong and China. And in no way would that be conducive to one country, two systems. It's just going to be worse and worse.
Instead of integration, it's going apart.
Yes, yes.
How is this going to all end? Badly?
This is not the end. The end is only if Xi Jinping says, I want to control Hong Kong even more. But if we really trust Hong Kong people, let us be masters of our own house, then this thing will blow over very quickly. It's like a typhoon, gone.
It's extremely sad to see what's happening to Hong Kong. But that said, I'm not without hope.
Hong Kong is no stranger to inclement conditions. It always seems to bounce right back. But this time, with no end in sight to the unrest, most would probably agree that that signature Hong Kong resiliency is perhaps facing its most difficult challenge to date. I'm Stephen Engel. Thanks for watching.